The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the soft hum of the air conditioner. Amara Nwosu sat beside her husband's bed, holding his cold, weak hand. Dr. Chike Nwosu had always been full of life, a man who could light up a room with his laughter. But now he lay there pale and frail, his breathing slow and shallow. The doctor said his illness came suddenly, something they couldn't explain. Amara didn't understand how a healthy man could fall this sick so fast. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead and whispered a prayer under her breath. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but she refused to leave his side. Their marriage hadn't been perfect. There were secrets, distance, and words left unsaid, but love still held her there. She remembered the nights he worked late, the promises he made, and the quiet mornings they once shared. As the night dragged on, Chike stirred slightly, his lips trembling. Amara leaned closer, her heart racing. He looked at her with tired eyes and whispered, barely audible, "I'm sorry, Amara, forgive me." She froze, confused. "Forgive you? For what?" she asked, but his eyes had already begun to close again. She told herself he was only speaking out of pain or fever. Still, those words echoed in her mind like a haunting melody. Hours later, the monitor gave one long, final beat. The doctor entered, checked his pulse, and gently said, "He's gone." Amara felt her world crumble. She pressed her forehead to his hand, whispering through tears, "Goodbye, my love." She believed it was the end of their story. But what she didn't know was that those final words, "Forgive me," would soon unravel a truth darker than anything she could ever imagine. Amara stepped out of the ward, her eyes blurry from crying, her legs weak beneath her. The air outside the room felt heavy, filled with the faint smell of disinfectant and sadness. She needed a moment to breathe, to clear her head and stop the ache in her chest. She leaned against the wall near the nurse's station, wiping her face with a tissue, trying to gather herself before calling the family. Two nurses stood a few feet away, their voices low but urgent. At first, Amara didn't pay attention. Hospitals were full of whispers. But then, one of them said something that made her heart skip a beat. "Poor woman," one whispered. "She still doesn't know." "About what?" the other asked quietly, glancing around nervously. "The doctor's wife," the first nurse replied. "She doesn't know about the other woman, or that the poison worked faster than expected." Amara froze, her blood turning cold. "Poison? Other woman?" Her hand tightened around her purse as her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Surely she had misheard them. Her husband had died from an illness. The doctors said so. This had to be some cruel misunderstanding. The nurses noticed her standing there, eyes wide and face pale. They immediately stopped talking, exchanging panicked glances. "Mrs. Nwosu," one of them said too cheerfully, forcing a smile. "We're so sorry for your loss." Amara stared at them, trying to read their faces. "What did you just say?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. They both shook their heads quickly. "Nothing, ma'am. We were just talking about a patient," one said, avoiding her gaze. Then they hurried off down the hall, their footsteps echoing against the tile floor. Amara stood there, frozen in place. The hallway seemed to close in around her. Her mind replayed their words again and again like a broken record. Poison worked faster than expected. Other woman, she doesn't know. Her throat went dry. Could they have been talking about Chike? No, it couldn't be. He was sick, wasn't he? He'd been coughing, growing weaker. The doctors said it was an infection. But the suddenness of it all, the strange way his condition worsened overnight, it all flashed before her eyes now, and nothing made sense anymore. Her grief began to twist into something sharper, confusion, disbelief, and a growing dread. What if his death wasn't natural? What if someone had hurt him? Tears welled up again, but this time they came from anger. She walked back toward the ward, her mind spinning. Every word Chike had said in his final moments now sounded different. "I'm sorry, Amara, forgive me." She had thought he was just delirious, speaking nonsense. But what if he'd been trying to tell her something? Amara pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart pound. For the first time since his death, she wasn't sure what to believe. The grief that had weighed her down now burned with a new fire, the desperate need for answers. Whatever those nurses meant, whatever they were hiding, she would find out. Amara couldn't sleep that night. The nurses' whispered words kept echoing in her head like a song she couldn't turn off. The poison worked faster than expected. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Chike's face pale and still, and heard his final words. "I'm sorry, Amara, forgive me." The confusion and heartbreak were now mixed with suspicion. Something wasn't right, and deep down she knew it. The next morning, she went through Chike's things, hoping to find something, anything, that would make sense of what she'd heard. His phone was still in her bag. She hadn't touched it since the hospital. Her hands trembled as she turned it on. The screen lit up with messages, notifications, and photos she had never seen before. Scrolling through, she found several text messages from an unsaved number. They were personal, too personal. "I miss you, my love. Last night was perfect. When will you tell her?" Amara felt her stomach twist. The messages weren't from a patient or a colleague, they were from another woman. Her chest tightened as she kept reading. There were also screenshots of money transfers, large amounts, sent to someone named Ngozi. That name made her heart stop. Ngozi had once been mentioned by Chaik, a young nurse who worked in his department for a short while. Amara remembered her faintly, polite, quiet, and always respectful. But now everything felt like a lie. Digging deeper, she opened the gallery and found photos of Chaik and Ngozi together. Some were taken during conferences abroad, smiling at beaches and restaurants, places Amara had never been. Her world began to crumble piece by piece. Fueled by anger and a desperate need for truth, Amara went to the hospital and asked about Ngozi. A cleaner whispered that she had resigned suddenly 2 months before Chaik fell ill. That only made her more suspicious. With the help of a friend who worked in administration, Amara found Ngozi's address and decided to confront her. When Ngozi opened the door, she froze. Her eyes widened in shock and her hands trembled. "Mrs. Nwosu," she whispered, her voice breaking. Amara didn't waste time. "How long?" she asked coldly. "How long were you seeing my husband?" Ngozi burst into tears. "Please, I never meant to hurt you," she cried. "He told me things were over between you two. He said he was lonely." Amara's jaw clenched, her heart pounding. "Did you poison him?" she demanded. Ngozi shook her head violently. "No, I swear on my life, I didn't. I loved him, but he changed. He was scared, paranoid. He said people at the hospital were after him because he discovered something dangerous." Amara frowned. "What are you talking about?" Ngozi wiped her tears. "He found out about some fraud, fake drugs being sold under the hospital's name. He tried to report it. Then suddenly he got sick." Amara stepped back, stunned. So this wasn't just about betrayal, it was something bigger. Ngozi looked terrified. "He told me if anything happened to him, it wouldn't be an accident." For a long moment, neither woman spoke. The truth had begun to surface, but it only made everything more complicated. Chaik hadn't just betrayed her heart, he had stumbled into something deadly. And now, Amara realized, she was standing at the edge of that same danger. Amara couldn't shake off what Ngozi had told her. Every word replayed in her mind: fake drugs, fraud, danger. She didn't want to believe it, but something deep inside told her that Chaik's death was no ordinary tragedy. It was a warning, and if he had really uncovered something at the hospital, there had to be proof somewhere. The next morning, she drove to Chaik's private office, a small space he used outside the hospital for research and writing. The room still smelled faintly of his cologne. His stethoscope hung on the wall, and his coat was draped neatly over the chair. Everything looked untouched since the day he fell sick. For a moment, Amara stood silently, letting the memories wash over her. Then she began to search. She checked the drawers, files, and folders, mostly patient notes and medical journal. But one drawer was locked. She remembered how Chaik always carried a small key on his keychain, the one she'd thrown into her bag after the hospital. She tried it, and the drawer clicked open. Inside, she found a flash drive wrapped in tissue and a small notebook filled with random numbers and letters. It didn't make sense at first, but her gut told her it was important. Amara took the flash drive home and called a friend, Depo, a tech expert who'd helped her before with her small business. She trusted him. When he arrived, she handed him the flash drive and explained everything. "I think Chaik found something dangerous," she said softly. "Can you open this for me?" Depo connected it to his laptop. "It's encrypted," he murmured, eyes narrowing as lines of code appeared on the screen. Whoever made this wanted it hidden. He worked quietly for a while, typing, running programs, until finally, a folder opened. Inside were dozens of documents, shipment records, invoices, and private emails between hospital executives. Amara leaned in, her heart racing as Depo clicked through them. The files showed that the hospital had been distributing counterfeit medicines, fake drugs passed off as real ones. Patients had been dying because of them. Chaik had discovered it, gathered proof, and planned to report it. Amara covered her mouth, shocked. "Oh my God," she whispered. Depo kept scrolling. "Look here, there are dates and payment logs," he said. He must have tracked where the fake medicine came from. It's a full report. One file was titled, "For Ministry Submission, Final Draft." The timestamp showed it was saved just 2 days before Chaik collapsed. Tears filled Amara's eyes. Her husband, the man she thought was hiding from her, had been fighting something much bigger than she could imagine. Yes, he had betrayed her love, but maybe he had also tried to do the right thing in the end. She stared at the laptop screen, realizing the horrible truth. Chaik hadn't died from illness. He had been silenced. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "They killed him because he knew too much." For the first time, her grief shifted into a burning purpose. Chaik's lies had broken her heart, but now his hidden truth was pushing her towards something bigger: justice. Amara couldn't rest after what she had found on the flash drive. The documents, the fake medicine records, the emails, everything pointed to one thing: her husband had uncovered a huge crime. But she still didn't know who was behind it, or how far it went. There was one person who might know, Dr. F. Osage, Chike's closest friend and colleague at the hospital. She remembered F from the funeral, how uneasy he looked, avoiding her eyes the entire time. At the time, she thought it was just grief. Now she wasn't so sure. The next morning, she drove to his clinic. He looked startled when he saw her at the door, his hands tightening around his coffee mug. "Amara," he said, forcing a smile. "I didn't expect." "We need to talk," she interrupted gently, her voice steady but serious. He hesitated before letting her in. The clinic was quiet, the air heavy with tension. Amara sat down opposite him, her eyes fixed on his face. "You were Chike's closest friend," she began. "You know something, don't you? About what really happened to him?" F looked down, avoiding her gaze. "Amara, please," he said quietly. "Let it go. Chike's gone. Digging into this will only bring you pain." Her heart pounded. "Don't tell me to let it go," she said, her voice shaking. "I found his files, F. I know about the counterfeit medicine. I know he was planning to expose the hospital. What I don't know is who made sure he couldn't." F's eyes widened, and for a moment, silence filled the room. He rubbed his temples, breathing heavily. "You shouldn't have opened that flash drive," he murmured. "Why?" she demanded. "Because it's dangerous? Because it's true." He looked up at her, his expression full of fear. "Yes, it's true," he finally said, his voice trembling. "Chike found out that some senior officials were importing fake drugs, life-saving medications replaced with cheap, useless copies. They were making millions while patients were dying. He couldn't keep quiet. He gathered evidence and told me everything." Amara felt chills run down her spine. "So he confronted them?" F nodded slowly. "He sent an email to the board, warning them that he'd go public. 2 days later, he collapsed during rounds. They said it was a viral infection, but I knew something was wrong. He'd been taking prescribed medication, but someone must have tampered with it." Amara's hands trembled. "You're saying he was poisoned?" F's eyes filled with tears. "Yes. They made it look like an illness. I wanted to tell you, but I was terrified. After he died, I started getting messages too, threats. I've been living in fear ever since." Amara leaned back, feeling the weight of his words crush her chest. Everything suddenly made sense. Chike's strange apology, the nurse's whispers, the missing pieces. Her husband hadn't just betrayed her heart. He had been betrayed by the people he trusted. He didn't die of sickness. He was murdered by greed. F wiped his face with shaking hand. "Amara, please don't go any further. These people are powerful." But it was too late. Amara's sorrow had turned into fire. "They took my husband," she whispered. "Now they'll face the truth." Amara left Dr. F's clinic that evening with her heart pounding and her mind racing. The truth she had just learned wouldn't stop echoing in her head. Chike was poisoned. Her husband didn't die because of sickness or fate. He died because he tried to do the right thing. The thought filled her with both pride and rage. She drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel tightly, a storm of emotions swirling inside her. That night, while sitting on the couch surrounded by Chike's files, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She opened the message. "Stop asking questions if you want to stay safe." Amara froze, staring at the screen. Her throat went dry. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she took a shaky breath, trying to convince herself it was just a prank. But when the second message arrived minutes later, "You don't know who you're dealing with," fear crept in. Someone was watching her. Someone knew she was getting close to the truth. The next morning, she stepped outside and found her car windshield smashed. The files she had left in the passenger seat were scattered across the floor, though nothing had been stolen. It wasn't a robbery, it was a warning. Her neighbor, Mama Kemi, rushed out and gasped when she saw the map. "Amara, my dear, you must stop this," she said, clutching her arm. "These people you're chasing, they are dangerous. Let it go before it's too late." But Amara couldn't. Every warning only made her more determined. "They killed my husband," she said quietly. "I won't let them get away with it." Still, she couldn't ignore the growing tension. She noticed a black car parked near her house several nights in a row. Strange men lingered around her gate, pretending to make phone calls. Once, she saw someone following her home from the grocery store. Her heart raced every time she looked over her shoulder. Despite the fear, Amara gathered every piece of evidence she had. The text messages from Ngozi, the files from the flash drive, the notes Chike left behind, even the voice messages he had recorded before he died. She knew she couldn't handle this alone anymore. It was time to take it to the authorities. She met Depo again and handed him a folder. "Make backup copies of everything," she said. "If anything happens to me, make sure this gets out." He looked at her nervously. "Amara, you're playing with fire. Are you sure?" She nodded, her eyes fierce. "I've already lost everything that mattered. What else can they take from me?" That night, Amara sat by her window, watching the streetlights flicker. The same black car drove by slowly, its headlights sweeping across her face. But she didn't flinch this time. Fear had burned away, leaving only purpose. She whispered to herself, You took my husband's life, but you won't take his truth." With that, she picked up her phone, ready to call the police. The grieving widow had become something else entirely, a woman standing alone against corruption, ready to fight no matter the cost. Amara knew she couldn't live in fear any longer. For weeks, she'd been collecting evidence, backing up files, and piecing together every bit of truth her husband had left behind. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about Chaik. It was about justice. About all the patients who had died because of fake medicine. About the doctors who stayed silent out of fear. She couldn't let it stay buried. So she made a plan. Amara called the hospital board and requested a meeting, saying she wanted to hand over her late husband's unfinished research to honor his memory. They agreed, thinking it was a simple gesture from a grieving widow. But she had no intention of keeping quiet anymore. This was the moment she would expose them. The boardroom was sleek and cold, filled with men and women in expensive suits. The hospital's logo hung proudly behind them, a symbol that now made Amara sick. As she entered, whispers filled the room. Some smiled politely, others looked annoyed. "Mrs. Nwosu," the chairman said, adjusting his glasses, "we're deeply sorry for your loss. You said you wanted to discuss Dr. Nwosu's work." "Yes," Amara replied calmly, placing a brown folder on the table. Her heart pounded, but her voice stayed firm. "My husband dedicated his life to this hospital. Before he died, he was working on something he didn't get to finish." The chairman nodded. "We appreciate that. If you'll just leave the materials with us." Amara interrupted him. "I think you should hear what he found first." She opened the folder and spread out the documents, the shipment records, the fake invoices, the names. The board members leaned forward, confusion turning to alarm. "What is this?" one of them demanded. "It's proof," Amara said steadily. "Proof that some of you have been importing fake drugs, stealing real ones, and letting innocent people die. My husband found out. He tried to expose it. That's why he's dead." The room went silent. Then a man at the far end scoffed. "This is nonsense," he said coldly. "You're a grieving woman, Mrs. Nwosu. You don't understand how things work here." Amara didn't flinch. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. "Then maybe you'll understand this." She pressed play. Chaik's voice filled the room, shaky but clear. "If anything happens to me, it's because I tried to stop them. They warned me to stay silent, but I can't. People are dying because of their greed." The boardroom froze. No one moved. The color drained from several faces. One woman gasped softly. The chairman looked like he'd seen a ghost. Moments later, Amara stood and said, "The police already have copies of everything. You can't hide anymore." Within hours, news broke across Lagos. The police raided the hospital, arresting several top executives. The scandal made headlines, hospital corruption exposed, doctor's death linked to poison plot. Amara watched it all unfold on TV that night. Justice had been served, but she didn't feel victorious. The truth had come out, yet it left her hollow. Her husband had betrayed her heart, but died trying to save others. As tears rolled down her face, she whispered to herself, "You were wrong, Chaik. You didn't die in vain." But deep inside, she knew, some wounds don't heal with justice. They just stop bleeding. Months had passed since the scandal broke. The hospital executives were behind bars, and the story had spread all over Nigeria. People called Amara a hero, the widow who exposed corruption. But behind the headlines and praise, she was still just a woman carrying a broken heart. Justice had come, yes, but peace hadn't. Every night she still dreamed of Chaik, his voice, his touch, and that last whisper, "Forgive me." Then one morning, Amara got a call from the authorities. The case was being finalized, but there was one last step, a full forensic examination of Chaik's remains. The court had ordered an exhumation to confirm the poison that ended his life. The news made her chest tighten. She had fought for this moment, yet the thought of digging up his body filled her with dread. The day of the exhumation was heavy and gray. Amara stood at the edge of the cemetery, her black shawl fluttering in the wind. The men worked silently, removing the coffin with care. As they carried it to the van, she turned away, her eyes burning with tears. Memories flooded back. Their wedding day, their first home, the laughter they once shared before lies and secrets destroyed it all. Weeks later, the forensic report arrived. The lab results confirmed everything she already knew in her heart. Traces of a rare toxin were found in his bloodstream. Chaik hadn't died of illness. He had been poisoned, just as she suspected. The findings cleared his name and proved his death was no accident. But instead of relief, Amara felt her heart break all over again. The government held a press conference, praising her courage and Chaik's bravery. But Amara stayed silent. She didn't want the cameras or applause. She just wanted closure. So she arranged for his reburial, a quiet, private ceremony with only a few close friends and family. The second funeral was nothing like the first. There were no big speeches, no long prayers, just soft music and the rustle of trees in the wind. As the coffin was lowered into the ground once more, Amara stepped forward, holding a small white rose in her hand. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "You betrayed me in life," she said softly, her words carried by the breeze. "But you died protecting others. You were wrong, Chaik. You didn't die in vain." She paused, her tears finally falling. "I forgive you." The crowd stood in silence as she dropped the rose onto the coffin. Her tears weren't just for love lost. They were for everything they had been, and everything they could never be again. As the grave was covered, Amara looked up at the sky. The clouds began to part, and sunlight spilled over the cemetery. For the first time in a long while, she felt something shift inside her. Not happiness, not peace, but a quiet acceptance. Chaik was gone, but the truth had finally set them both free. After the reburial, Amara could have disappeared from the public eye. No one would have blamed her. She had lost her husband, her peace, and a piece of herself in the storm. But instead of hiding, she chose to rise. Her pain became her fuel. She realized that if she walked away, all of it, the lies, the corruption, Chaik's death, would mean nothing. So she decided to turn tragedy into something powerful. It started small. A local journalist reached out, asking to interview her about the hospital scandal. Amara hesitated at first, but then she agreed, not to talk about Chaik's affair or her grief, but to expose what went wrong in the healthcare system. During the interview, her calm voice carried a quiet strength as she said, "Patients trust doctors to save lives, not take them. What happened to my husband shouldn't happen to anyone else." That line went viral overnight. News channels replayed it again and again. People began calling her the voice of courage. Invitations came from universities, health boards, and advocacy groups. Amara, the woman who once cried alone in her kitchen, was now standing on national stages, urging hospitals to reform their policies and ensure medical accountability. But behind the strong speeches and calm smile, she was still healing. Every night when the cameras stopped flashing and the world went quiet, she sat on her balcony with a cup of tea and whispered, "I hope you're proud of this, Chaik." She didn't know if she was talking to his memory or to herself, maybe both. One day, while meeting with a group of investigative journalists, she shared her idea, a foundation to fight corruption in the medical world. A place that would support whistleblowers, protect honest doctors, and fund ethical medical practices. They loved it. Within months, the Chaik Nwosu Trust for Medical Integrity was born. Amara poured everything into it, her savings, her energy, her heart. She traveled across Nigeria, meeting doctors, nurses, and patients, sharing her story again and again. Hospitals began reviewing their supply chains, the government passed stricter health regulations, and slowly, the system started to change. Her husband's name, once tied to scandal and mystery, became a symbol of reform and courage. In public, people called her a hero. But Amara never saw herself that way. She was just a woman who refused to let pain destroy her. She still missed Chaik, the man who had lied, loved, and died in equal measure, but she no longer carried bitterness. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting what he did. It meant freeing herself from what his choices had done to her. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold, Amara stood before a plaque at the new hospital wing named after her husband. The words engraved beneath his name read, "Truth saves lives." She smiled through her tears. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something strong, beautiful, and full of purpose. The hospital looked different now, brighter, quieter, almost peaceful. Months had passed since the scandal, but for Amara, stepping inside again felt like walking through a memory she had been avoiding. The walls were freshly painted, the staff new, but her heart still remembered everything that had happened here. The night she said goodbye to her husband, the whispers she overheard, and the moment her world began to fall apart. She walked slowly down the corridor where it had all started. The same nurse's station, the same flickering light. But this time, there were no whispers, no gossip, no secrets hiding behind polite smile. Just silence. A heavy, honest silence that carried peace instead of fear. Amara stopped by the window, the one overlooking the city. Outside, the sun was rising over Lagos, golden light spilling over the skyline, washing everything in warmth. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. It wasn't the same world she once knew, and she wasn't the same woman anymore. She remembered all the pain, the betrayal, the anger, and how each wound had shaped her into someone stronger. She had learned that truth doesn't magically erase hurt. It doesn't bring back what was lost or make forgiveness easy, but it gives you something deeper, the freedom to finally start healing. Her voice echoed softly, as if carried by the morning breeze. "Truth doesn't heal you," she said quietly. "It frees you to begin healing." As she turned and walked away, the camera followed her steps, slow, steady, certain. Outside, the sun rose higher, flooding the city with light. The story ended not with revenge or grief, but with renewal. The quiet strength of a woman who faced betrayal, corruption, and loss, yet refused to be silenced.